Hi, it's Kirsten, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about why you might have a tight pelvic floor. So, about 1 in 4 of us will have pain with intercourse or have things like tailbone pain, and these people tend to have a tight pelvic floor. And people come to me and they have a suspicion that they have a tight pelvic floor because they might be having a lot of difficulty passing urine, or they may be more constipated and have a hard time passing stool. And they say, why is my pelvic floor tight? I was okay before. Why is it tight now? So it's it runs a gamut of people. There's some people who I work with that might be 20 years old and they have pain with intercourse and they have a tight pelvic floor. And they said, Kirsten, I don't know why I have such a tight pelvic floor, why it's so painful to have intercourse. And most likely it's more or less how you're made, your soft tissue, and how you're like all made of your body. And people that are hypermobile, so people who are more flexible, they tend to often have a slightly tighter pelvic floor. Not all the time, okay? So don't be like, hey, I do yoga, I'm super flexible, and I don't have a tight pelvic floor. Okay, well, that's great. Just the trend is that if you have a tight pelvic floor, you may have more incidence of having that hypermobility, so that extra flexibility. And it might be that you had an infection. So sometimes, especially my younger people, they might feel that they have a yeast infection and use products for that when they actually don't have a yeast infection. And sometimes then the products can irritate that area, and then it can become a snowball effect where they start having irritation at the back half of at the entrance of the vagina. So the tight pelvic floor can then happen because they have pain, right? So just like if we have tight shoulders, we can get a headache, or if you have fallen down and hurt your knees, you might start limping from the pain and then you get tightness. So they go back and forth. And if you have pain in the pelvic floor, say one of my clients I was just talking to just the other day who had an IUD put in, but it was very painful. I don't know what went on during that procedure, but it was so painful for her, and her pelvic floor got so tight that when she tried to have intercourse, whatever, a week or 2 weeks later, she found it painful. So she came to see me, and we had to work on that. So sometimes flexible people might get it. Sometimes pain can cause it because we do muscle guarding, because it hurts, right? And so our pelvic floor is kind of tightened up that way. And it can also be if you do have problems with constipation, so you're always trying to get the stool out and you're using your pelvic floor incorrectly, that can also cause problems with how the pelvic floor is working. And people that might have like chronic UTIs, they often have a tight pelvic floor because it can burn, it can hurt. So I get it all the time. Why do I have a tight pelvic floor? And often it is how you're made or what's happened to you, whether you've had an experience like falling down on your bottom really, really, really hard and hurting your tailbone where it hurts to sit, and maybe you have to use a cushion, or it really hurts to try and stand up after sitting for a while. And that can show that the muscles are actually pulling on that tailbone. So when you sit to stand, so you sit down and then you stand up and you get that really strong catch. So big falls onto our bottom can also cause a tighter pelvic floor. And I do this is just my way of trying to explain it. It has nothing to do with research. So I say it's Kirsten's tightness of the pelvic floor. Say it's 1 to 10, and 10 might be someone who has vaginismus. And that's where you try to have any penetration into the vagina, And honestly, sometimes I can't even get a pinky in there. And there's a lot of muscle guarding. So their legs will try and pull in and guard, or they like start creeping up the bed. And it's really, really painful. And there's a lot of muscle guarding and protective behaviors around that. And that's like a 10 out of 10, right? And then we have, let's say, our 1 out of 10, which is such low tone, we call it. So let's say someone has had a stroke and they're having a lot of incontinence. And it's really tricky to work on because the muscle's not working as well. So if you can imagine someone who's had a stroke where their arm isn't working as well, the pelvic floor can do that also. Then you have your perfect, say 5, 6, the wonderful pelvic floor that's relaxed, but it's strong and it's just perfect in so many different ways. And 4s are still pretty darn good, and 6s and 6s and a halves, they're all pretty good too. But when we start getting a little tighter, like say 7, because maybe we haven't had intercourse for quite some time and we're 45 years old and our tissues are changing, our estrogen might be dropping down, and so we might have a bit more sensitivity at the entrance of the vagina. And then we find a new partner and we have penetrative sex and the tissues have thinned a bit, maybe they're a bit more dry and it's painful. And then we go into the muscle guarding. Okay, so that would be like a 7 out of 10, where maybe with some lubricant, we can kind of get back into it and it's not so painful. At 8, no one wants to have sex. It's too painful for them. And Kirsten's scale of 9 out of 10, they can't have sex. It's just way too painful. So again, why do I have a tight pelvic floor? Well, like I said, maybe you've had an injury. Maybe you've fallen down really hard and you've had some muscle guarding. Maybe you've had irritation due to some creams that you've used. Potentially you are hypermobile. Maybe your tissue is the type of tissue that is muscle guarding. Do you know that a lot of people who have a tight pelvic floor also have a tight jaw? Now again, you might have a tight jaw and your pelvic floor is absolutely fine. So it's not 100% correlation there, but I think it's kind of interesting, right? Like a lot of clients that have a tight pelvic floor, they also wear a night guard because they tend to clench or maybe they grind their teeth at night. Okay. And so what we can do is we have a lot of strategies that actually help with a tight pelvic floor. And we don't know exactly why everyone who has a tight pelvic floor, their own special makeup and why they have a tight pelvic floor. But I do try and tell my clients, you know what, you're not alone. About 1 in 4 of us tend to have a tight pelvic floor and may have, and again, remember I said, like Kirsten's scale, maybe it's only like a 7 out of 10, like it's not too bad, but once in a while, if we don't use enough lube, it's like, it's a little bit sore. When we get to 8, it's like, oh man, this is hurting. And like, I don't know if I really want to tonight because it just hurts all the time. And then a 9 is like, and 10 is that vaginismus, which is so much muscle guarding. So, and the good news is that you can do treatment and you can pull people back. So if they are usually like a 6.5, 7, but they're pretty good on their own little way and they've never really had any problems. And like one of my clients who got bumped by a shopping cart super hard in Costco and like on this one side had all this bruising, and then she came to see me. I couldn't believe it. Her one side of her pelvic floor was so tight and she was having a lot of deep pain in her pelvic floor. And that one side was so tight. So we did some internal releases and we released that tight pelvic floor and gave her some stretches, and then actually it was very fast. It only took 2 or 3 appointments and off she went on her merry way and she was back to her normal. So it's easy to get people kind of back down. It's harder to get people who are really, really tight to try and get them to normalize their tone and not be super tight in the pelvic floor. But the majority of people, we can get them back down where they're having intercourse more comfortably. And that would be things such as pelvic wands and the dilators and the self-releases and the pelvic stretches and the breathing techniques, the meditation. So all those other videos. Okay, I hope that's helped about why you might have a tight pelvic floor. You're not alone, and there's strategies that can really help you. Okay, all the best.